welcome again to the Acid Trash Jamboree, and to another exciting instalment of Box Sets of Doom. Up for analysis today is Join the Dots, a massive, sprawling collection of B-sides and rare tracks by The Cure, covering the years 1978 to 2001. When I first dug this out again for a re-listen, I thought about reviewing it, but figured I'm probably not enough of a true Cure fanatic to be up to the job. Yeah, I got into the band in my late teens, so the early 2000s, and still only have a smallish chunk of their main albums, most of which I know pretty well, though I'm still missing a couple of classics, and I'm only fleetingly familiar with their post-peak work. So yeah, in light of that, the thought of trying to tackle this box was pretty daunting. Eventually, though, I found a way in, so I'll try my best. So yeah, in case you're wondering why I've ended up with this box when I'm evidently not the most dedicated Cure follower, well, basically I'm the type of weirdo that's fascinated by the hidden parts of musicians' discographies, the demos, the early works, the unreleased stuff from the vaults, the out-of-character experiments, and indeed the B-sides. So yeah, as soon as I read about this when it was first released, I knew I needed it, though unfortunately it was way out of my price range back then. Fast forward though about 12 years or so, and for some reason Join the Dots was selling for a very reasonable price online, so I was finally able to take the plunge. And yeah, by its very nature, this is a very mixed collection, both in terms of its sound and also in its overall quality. If you're familiar with their very earliest albums, then you'll recognise a similar trajectory in the change in sound of their B-sides too, with things like Plastic Passion and Pillbox Tales representing the thin, scratchy and neurotic punkiness of Three Imaginary Boys, alongside the immortal 10:15 Saturday Night, which was used both as the flip side to the first single, as well as opening said debut LP, whilst Do the Hanser is an anomaly, being a rather annoying disco funk parody that the band didn't even want to release at first. And yeah, speaking of early anomalies, I'm Cold is a good one, and was actually one of the main reasons that I wanted to check this box out. Apparently, it started life as one of their breakneck punk thrashes, though once recorded, Robert Smith subjected it to all manner of studio experimentation, slowing the tape down and piling on delay effects and spasmodic bursts of lead guitar for disorientating psychedelic effect. If you listen carefully, this muddy trudge of a song also features Susie Sue on backing vocals, though it's taken me about 12 plays to even notice her. She's mixed so quietly. There's a quote in Record Collector magazine from back when the box came out, where Smith describes this song as potentially where we were going next, but never did, which is true in a way, though obviously there's always been a massive psychedelic streak running through the Cure down the years, so it's certainly not the last thing they ever did in this vein. Even more nerd-friendly and obtuse are Another Journey by Train and Descent, the instrumental B-sides of A Forest and Primary, respectively. The former has that same dry, arid, post-Joy Division sound as A Forest's parent album, 17 Seconds, but in truth sounds more like a backing track in need of a vocal rather than a standalone piece, whilst Descent is even sparser, mostly consisting of Smith twanging away morosely on what sounds like a 6-string bass, though don't quote me on that. I haven't heard it in a while, but I guess this track fits with the similarly threadbare Carnage Visors, a short film soundtrack that the band composed circa the Faith album. So yeah, as much as I love instrumental mood pieces, these are a couple that, for me at least, don't really live up to their potential and are more exciting on paper. Much more satisfying is Splintered in Her Head, a rather disturbing, mostly instrumental psychedelic effort from 1981, dominated by a tom-heavy tribal beat and washes of atonal harmonica wailing, which points the way forward to both the classic album from the year after, you know, the one with the title that starts with the letter P, and to some of the darker, more brooding tracks on The Smith Dominated the Top from 1984, which, if I remember correctly, was the first Cure album I bought, as I'd read it was their trippiest effort. So yeah, no surprises there. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. After this, we enter the period documented on the Japanese Whispers collection, or in other words, the B-sides from Let's Go to Bed, The Walk, and The Love Cats. Here, the band shed some of the ultra-depressive gloom of the preceding 3 LPs, and on the A-sides at least, embraced a more eclectic, pop-oriented sound. Some of the B-sides from this period are still pretty moody though, and as far as I'm concerned, these are all gems, particularly Just One Kiss and Lament. Then Speak My Language and Mr. Pink Eyes complement the Love Cats well, being similarly eccentric and jazzy concoctions. Going back to the Top era a second, neither of the tracks that accompanied the Caterpillar do much for me, unfortunately. Then the first disc concludes with a clutch of Head on the Door adjacent B-sides, including the Go Nowhere and rather grating groover New Day, the wistful jangler The Exploding Boy, and the proto-Mercury Rev synth orchestra pomp of A Few Hours After This. So yeah, CD1 covers a fair chunk of The Cure's history. In contrast, half of CD2 is taken up by extra stuff from the ultra-fertile Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me sessions. Never my go-to Cure album. I've had it for something like 20 years and I still don't recall how most of it goes. So yeah, that's definitely one to dig out before long. Said LP extras are mostly quite good though, opening with the flailing, thrashing rocker A Japanese Dream, before calming down again with the ballad Breathe, which manages to be effectively poignant in spite of it being rather predictable chordally. Its florid, synthesized orchestral arrangement, sounding like some bizarre mixture of Guns N' Roses' November Rain and the score from Necromantic. If stuff like this and the sumptuous Catch Flipside, A Chain of Flowers, had actually featured on the Kiss Me album, then I'm sure I'd have been drawn back to it as much as I have with albums like Faith and The Head on the Door, but alas. Likewise, the Just Like Heaven single was supported by 2 more pleasant tunes, one of which, Sugar Girl, repeats the trick from Breathe of taking a tired old chord progression and, excuse the pun, breathing new life into it. Speaking of Just Like Heaven, we get a thoroughly unnecessary and horribly dated remix of it tucked away at the end of the disc. But yeah, staying with remixes a second, after quickly A-Bing between them, the version of Icing Sugar included here appears to be a bit more direct and immediate sounding than the LP take. Whilst it's always nice to hear How Beautiful You Are in any guise, one of the few Kiss Me tracks that I actually know well. This era is rounded off by To the Sky, originally a mega rarity, issued only on a promo sampler CD a couple of years after Kiss Me. Again, this mostly hinges around a tried and tested, near doo-wop chord progression, moving into slightly more interesting, floaty psychedelic waters for the chorus. Though ultimately, this song doesn't do too much of any consequence, so it's not surprising it stayed in the can for a while. Quickly rattling through the disintegration period, I much prefer the pair of tunes included with Love Song to the ones that accompanied Lullaby. Namely the glorious mini-masterpiece Too Late, which gives Johnny Marr a decent run for his money in the winsome jangle pop stakes, and the spooky, brooding epic Fear of Ghosts. Now, there are a number of cover tunes tackled on Join the Dots, the first of which is The Doors' classic Kinks rip, Hello I Love You. The Cure recorded 3 versions of this, 2 of which were initially featured on an Elektra Records anniversary comp. The most interesting of these is easily the meandering, previously unreleased psychedelic mix, where Smith & Co. really make the song their own, though I wouldn't recommend operating any heavy machinery while listening to it, not least if you've already made your way through Fear of Ghosts, as their combined effect is positively soporific. That just leaves Harold and Joe, named after two legendary characters from the Aussie soap opera Neighbours. Harold Bishop was, of course, played by Ian Smith, one of the stars of the classic Ozploitation gross-out flick Body Melt. So yeah, an extra bit of trivia there for you, free of charge. The tune itself was apparently inspired by the emerging baggy and Manchester scenes, where indie guitar rock joined forces with loping dance beats to decidedly mixed results. Yeah, never my favourite music by any stretch. The Cure's take on the baggy sound is thankfully way less stodgy than much of what I'm familiar with. The song floating by on a delicate bed of ambient organ, which hovers dreamily over the perky electronic rhythms, though it's still nothing to write home about. Much more inspired is CD3's opener, This Twilight Garden, from the 1992 High single. Actually, for me, this is quite possibly the highlight of the whole box. A gorgeously dreamy and richly layered minor key delight, with a slinking, liquid centre and a weepy chorus to literally die for. Yeah, in my head at least, this ranks as one of the all-time should-have-been a single B-sides. Indeed, Smith himself regrets not doing more with this one, saying it really should have featured on the Wish album, and praising it as one of their best love songs and his favourite B-side of all. Of course, the act of burying high-quality songs on single B-sides was nothing new, even in the 90s. Yeah, stretching back to the psychedelic late 60s, successful bands like Pink Floyd and the aforementioned Kinks had some corkers, whereas lesser-known acts oftentimes simply weren't allowed to put forward their lysergic masterworks as A-sides, their record companies forcibly insisting they go with some horrible bit of bubblegum nonsense or a redundant cover version instead. So yeah, eternal thanks to comp series like Rubble for rescuing these treasures from the abyss. Then, by the 80s, obviously you had bands like the Smiths, whose catalogues were such an embarrassment of riches that they could quite easily chuck away all manner of finely honed gems off into 7 and 12-inch oblivion. I suspect there was a certain amount of willful perversity about the practice by this point, particularly in the alternative scene. Indeed, with later bands like Blur, Oasis and Suede knowingly relegating some of their finest material to relative obscurity for the true fans to relish, whilst their albums were oftentimes plagued by filler. Anyways, back to The Cure, and yeah, the excellent work certainly doesn't stop with This Twilight Garden. The band had evidently hit on a purple patch, with similarly glorious mood pieces like Play and The Big Hand bringing on the goosebumps, contrasting nicely with the pure pop of Halo and the up-tempo, post-punk angst of Scared as You and A Foolish Arrangement. The Wish era is rounded off by a previously unused mix of the album cut Doing the Unstuck, after which we get 2 versions of the Jimi Hendrix Experience Mindbender Purple Haze. The first of these plays out pretty much like the original, and apparently was initially only ever used as the opening song on Virgin Radio back in the day, whereas the second, issued on the Stone Free tribute album, is more of a mid-tempo, beat-driven, chill-out reimagining. Slightly more interesting to listen to if, like me, you've already heard this song hundreds of times. But yeah, in the cold light of 2024, production-wise, it just sounds a bit naff and dated. The sort of thing you'd hear played in trendy new age shops back in the 90s. Again, dated production hampers their overlong reading of David Bowie's plastic soul anthem Young Americans, which sounds more like Ace of Base to my ears. Then, towards the back end of the disc, we find two soundtrack contributions. The quasi-psychedelic but ultimately overly polished alt-rock pounder Burn, featured in the infamous Crow movie with Brandon Lee, and the orchestrated melodrama of Dredd Song, used appropriately enough in Judge Dredd. At this point, we hit the wild mood swings era, specifically the B-sides from the single The 13th. Whilst The Top may have been the first Cure album I bought outright, Wild Mood Swings was actually the first one I heard all the way through, on account of my borrowing it from my local library for 50p circa 2001 or so. I don't recall being at all impressed with said album though, and haven't heard the vast majority of it since. I'm not even sure I copied any of it onto a blank C90. So yeah, perhaps that's why it took me another couple of years to carry on investigating their stuff. In fairness though, these outtakes aren't too bad. In fact, the general fan consensus is that any one of them could have, and ultimately should have, featured on the album instead of the weak material that did find its way on there. The slow burn, psychedelic epic, It Used to Be Me, is often singled out as the crowning glory from this period, whilst the mournful Ocean is lifted from its dirge-like, depressive doldrums by a sighingly lovely and resigned-sounding string motif. Over on the concluding disc, the first of the Mint Car B-sides, Home, sets a pretty generic love lyric to a fresh-sounding, vaguely tripped-out backing, whilst its flipside friends, Waiting and A Pink Dream, sound suspiciously like The Cure by numbers to my ears, the band reassembling bits and pieces of their old tunes to underwhelming effect. Okay, so the Wild Mood Swings album cut, This Is a Lie, is next, albeit in a so-called ambient remix form, though having quickly revisited the initial version for comparison, it's not massively different, the remix starting with just the string section and vocals, then introducing the rest of the band as things wind on. Either way, it's actually a good song and about as folky as I've ever heard The Cure get. I remember reading somewhere that Robert Smith once had the idea of recording an album of acoustic songs with a string section. Not so much in a Spinal Tap, David St. Hubbins way, but more along the lines of Nick Drake. And yeah, you can definitely hear shades of Way to Blue and even Riverman in this tune. So I wonder if this was one that was in the running. Unfortunately, the pleasingly melancholy mood created by This Is a Lie is rudely shattered by a horrible 8-minute dance rock monstrosity by the name of Wrong Number. A collaboration with longtime Bowie and Tin Machine guitarist, and as of 2012, official Cure member Reeves Gabrels. The less said about this ugly mess, the better. Yeah, from this point on, we're definitely in the boneyard of the box. Things dragging on with a couple more soundtrack and tribute album contributions, neither of which I particularly care for in honesty. The Bloodflowers era, Electro Reject Possession, doesn't do much to raise spirits, whilst the assorted remixes of that album's tunes don't exactly make me want to rush out and buy the originals. So, is there anything actually on this fourth CD to save it from the garbage heap I hear you scream? Sadly, not really. Coming up, also from the Bloodflowers sessions, is 6.5 minutes of blustery alternative nothingness, while the Cut Here B-side, Signal to Noise, is a weirdly annoying, post-millennial attempt at rewriting Friday I'm in Love by way of Just Like Heaven, and doesn't sound any better in either its acoustic or electric guise. I was going to say that the penultimate track here, an unreleased remix of Just Say Yes, Sounds like a lame Republica ripoff, until some diligent research revealed that Saffron from said Ready to Go and Drop Dead Gorgeous hit-making combo is indeed the joint lead vocalist here. So yeah, that's me told. I still don't like it though. Anyone still listening at this point just has the one track left to navigate through before they can safely retire the disc back to its box, never to be spun again. Unfortunately, said last track is a full 7-minute electronic mauling of the aforementioned A Forest, featuring another Bowie string spanker, Earl Slick, committing all manner of heinous guitar hero crimes over the shattered remains of that early minimalist classic. So yeah, we made it. Just to reiterate, this is an extremely variable listen, with Disc 4 ultimately proving to be a mostly rather dull slog for my taste, though overall, Join the Dots thankfully features more hits than misses over the course of its gargantuan, almost 5-hour runtime. One other reviewer mused that hidden somewhere within the box is the greatest album of all time. Perhaps the greatest Cure album of all time, at least. Whatever the case, unlike many B-sides and Rarities collections, there's simply too much solid material here to dismiss Join the Dots as mere completist-only fodder. So yeah, if you're new to The Cure and want to delve a bit deeper into their legacy, beyond the big singles and famous albums, this provides a wild, weird, and frequently excellent alternative history of their first 20-something years. Okay, so I hope you've enjoyed this video. Provided I've got something at least a little bit interesting to say, I do intend on talking about other less obscure artists and bands every now and again. If you're new to the channel, feel free to take a look around the archive to get a flavour of what it's all about. And if you like what you see, please hit subscribe. Thanks as ever for watching, and I'll catch you again soon on the Acid Trash Jamboree.